like, dude, you can't be living with another man's wife. I don't care if you both divorced. Christ said, if you divorce and remarry, at Luke 16:18, as plain as words can be, you are living in adultery. The bride of Christ, this bride is preparing herself. She cannot have divorce plus remarriage.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
You know when it's talking about a believer and a non-believer living together? You know, because there were people when they first became Christians. You had a believer that they were both non-believers to begin with.
I know. I understand.
And then one became a believer, right?
Yeah.
And then the non-believing husband or wife, whichever, as long as they'll live with you at peace, so to speak, or not interfere with your life, everything's fine.
According to this,
they don't want to live with you that way, right?
According to knowledge, exactly.
They don't want to live with you after you're a Christian. Everything's okay. They can leave and you're free to marry again.
No, you're not free to marry. You're just not in the bondage of that marriage.
Where does it say that?
Luke 16:18.
I'm talking about the explanation that's given in Scripture, where.
Yeah, but you're adding to the explanation. It doesn't say free
I'm not
to
adding
marry.
anything. I'm not.
It doesn't say you're free to marry, my dear. It says you're not in bondage to that marriage.
That's right, which means you're free.
It doesn't say you can remarry. It does not say you can remarry.
Or if you're not in bondage, you are free.
You're free from that bondage of that wife, accountable to answer to that husband.
Or that husband, whichever.
Look,
correct?
You can try to fluff that up. You cannot change 16:18.
I'm not under the law, so I'm not fluffing it up.
You cannot change Luke 16:18. If you divorce and remarry, you are living in adultery.
And who was he talking to there?
Who was he talking to?
Yeah, who is he talking to?
What difference does it make? Paul
it does make a difference.
Christ says it.
When he walked in the temple,
if a woman marries another when she has a living husband, she commits adultery.
And who was he talking to?
Who was talking to? Christ said it. Paul said it. I'll tell you who he's talking to. You, me, every son and daughter of Adam.
So anybody that's a non-believer. Wait a minute. Everybody that's a non-believer, right?
Every human. You think
every
human.
You
don't. You say.
May I say this, please? Anybody that's a non-Christian at this moment, right? At this moment, if they are married right now today, and say they get divorced, all right? They get a divorce for whether it's adultery or whatever reason they get divorced. They get a divorce under the law. They get a divorce. They're now divorced. 3 years down the road, they become a Christian.
He's going to remain unmarried for the rest of his life, because if he becomes a Christian, he's going to know perfectly well that he better not hook up with some adultery up in here.
Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that if somebody's a Christian or not a Christian at the age of 30, and his wife commits adultery or whatever, and they leave, they get a divorce, then 5 years down the road. May I finish?
You're wasting your time, hon. I've lived too long.
I'm not wasting my time. I'm simply asking.
Trying to convince you. What you're doing is trying
to. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm trying to make a
situation that you find outrageous, and I'm telling you, it's not going to work. I've seen it all. I've heard it all.
So you're telling me actually what that person would have to do then would be divorce if he's a non-believer. He gets a divorce and he gets remarried. Then he becomes a Christian, right? So now, if he's a Christian, the woman he's with now, he's living in adultery. Is that right? His second wife.
If you cannot divorce and remarry, you will be living in adultery. We have a policy of adultery in doomed America.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. I'm trying to
divorce and remarriage rate.
I'm trying to clarify this. If he was divorced, may I finish? If he got divorced and remarried, and then later on became a Christian, are you saying by that standard he'd have to divorce that second wife and either go back to the first one or stay single? Is that what you're saying?
Christ said to the woman, true that, when he said, bring your husband and let me talk to him. And she said, I don't have a husband. He said, got that right. And the man you're with now is not your husband. And those 5 men, they weren't your husband either.
No.
She had one husband, one man, one woman, one lifetime. That's the standard of Hebrews 13:4 and Christ at Luke 16:18 and in many other places. And they even said to him, tempting him in Matthew 19. But Moses allowed us to get a divorce up in here. He
that was
said,
because of your hardness of heart.
Because
right?
of the hardness of your impenitent heart, he suffered you to put him away. But from the beginning, it was not so. Malachi says, as plain as words can be, God hates divorce. Don't do it. If you do it because the unbelieving spouse wants to depart,
so
let
you're
him
telling
depart.
me
You must remain unmarried or be rejoined to that spouse.
So even if that spouse that you divorced earlier when you were both sinners is still a sinner, you've got to go back and remarry that person.
Or I got a better idea. Forget her. Don't remarry. Remain unmarried.
But what
Stop
if
acting like you've got to be having sex with someone or your life isn't going to be complete.
I understand it, but my question is still, if this person's on this earth, and we both know people have physical weaknesses, and they do, which usually leads them into doing things they shouldn't do.
And so the grace of God's not sufficient for his little sheep. Is that what you're going to blaspheme God with that? Please don't do that.
I didn't say that, did I?
Well, I'm just saying don't do it.
Are you going to talk for me?
I'm just saying don't do it.
All I'm asking is a question here. The
Okay,
person who was a sinner, and then becomes a Christian, okay, are you now saying they have to go back and do something differently to make up for something they've done when they've already been saved?
My dear, you can repackage that question 15 different ways. You have two options.
I'm trying to get a straight answer to it.
You have two options. Rejoin to that spouse or remain unmarried.
But if he rejoins to that spouse, he's unevenly yoked. Because he's now married a sinner.
That. I said your choices are two. She's still your spouse.
No, I don't think you have two choices there.
Let me tell you something else. If you have ordered your affairs aright, if you have policies of obedience to God in your household, you're not going to have to worry about your wife cheating on you. You think God's arm is short?
Well, we're talking about people that aren't. No, wait a minute. You are talking about people that aren't Christians primarily to begin with. That's what.
So you're talking about them. You're trying to create a certain kind of a straw man that'll make the standard of God different.
No,
and I'm telling you, no.
If you're talking to non-believers, if you're witnessing to non-believers, these are things that come up. All right.
That's why I've seen and heard it all, and I'm telling you, the standard doesn't change.
No, they come up. If you're talking to people that are not Christian, they come up.
Okay, so we've answered that now, haven't we?
What is the divorce rate in this country? 50
to 60% divorce and remarriage.
Okay, so the possibility of you talking to someone that was once married and then remarried is very great, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. Therefore, if you're talking to someone who was once married and now has remarried, but is still not a Christian at this time, right, and then becomes one, and therefore has been forgiven of his whole past life and everything he ever did or she ever did wrong as sin, it's now been washed away by the blood of Christ.
Exactly.
Now you're telling me they have to go do something in addition to that.
Here's what you have to do. You have to obey the commandments of God. This is the love of God, that you keep my commandments and they're not grievous. And these are they that have the right to eat from the fruit of the tree of life.
There's not a living person before they become a Christian that has got a chance, a snowball's chance, even in the summertime, of keeping any one of the 10 Commandments, plus all the other ones God has in there. Correct?
Last month, okay, now can I say something?
Is that true?
Last month, the guy wrote a letter, and he told us about his life and said, I only live about an hour from you, and I just learned of you, and we want to come to your church. And he put a phone number. So I called the phone number, and I talked to his wife for about 45 to 50 minutes, and it was about time for me to go do something else. And the wife, all of a sudden, what?
You talked to his wife. I was trying to get that straight.
I'm talking to his wife. She answered the phone that was in the letter. Before we hung up, all of a sudden, she says, we were both married before and divorced before we had this marriage and these 2 children. She says, now, what do you think about that? I said, I think it's adultery. I think Christ says it's adultery. She says, well, what do you think we ought to do about that? I said, you got to put it away. Now, after that, I was gone the next Sunday on a picket trip. The next Sunday, that man was in our church service. He was that first Sunday, too. And he was the next Sunday and the next Sunday. And that brings us to this last Sunday. After church on Sunday, he came over to have lunch with us. And as we were talking to him with his 2 little boys and not the wife, He told us our divorce was finalized on Friday. And by the way, I'm a testimony to the fact that human beings know it already. I knew all along that there was something way wrong with what we had done here.
Now, were those two little boys from that marriage?
Exactly.
The one he just divorced?
Exactly. She wasn't his wife anyway, but you have a ceremony to get hooked up with that adultery, you get a ceremony to get unhooked from that adultery. He put it away. He's a testimony against doomed America for every person.
Now, has he gone back to the other wife?
It.
Did he go back to the other wife?
No, he didn't go back to the other wife. I didn't say he had to go back to her. I said you got two choices. You remain unmarried or go back to the spouse. I didn't say you have to do it, and I certainly wouldn't encourage it. I was just trying to answer your hypothetical.
No, it's not a hypothetical. It does happen.
It sure does. And you know what? If you believe these words of Christ, and that is your focus and your drive in this life, and you live and walk in those scriptures, you're going to say, I'll do that. I'll do that.
Now may I ask you another question?
Losing eternal life.
I was asked a question the other day, and I couldn't answer it. About yours is the Westboro Baptist Church, am I correct?